Hi, my name's Paul Grogan and welcome to my top 10 games of 2019. Yes, 2019, and I'm releasing this video in January of 2021. So a little bit of an explanation for those confused. I do my top 10 games of the year a year after everybody else seems to do them. I normally like to do them in December. Unfortunately, December 2020 didn't quite go to plan for me, so I'm doing it in January. But the reason why I do these a year on is that I personally feel at the end of any given year, that isn't enough time for me to really evaluate the games of that year. A lot of games come out in October, November time, around the time of Essen Spiel, and doing a top 10 games of the year in December, well, some of them I've not played, and some of them I really need to play more. So I traditionally, this is only the second year that I've been doing these. I normally do them a year after everybody else. So this is my top 10 games of 2019. This video is only made possible thanks to the support of my Patreon campaign. It actually takes, although you're going to see the final video here, it takes a lot of work behind the scenes. Narrowing the choices down to 10, although you'll see later on I didn't manage to do that. Writing the script for all of this, about 2 days of work has gone into this video, and it's only made possible thanks to the support of the Patreon campaign. So if you like the video, obviously give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed to the channel, and make sure you click that little notification bell so that you get informed of new videos. But also, if you are in a position to be able to support me on Patreon and help support the channel, then that would be great. It's patreon.com/gaming rules. So this video is my favourite top 10 games that were released in 2019, not the ones that I played in 2019. The release date is according to Board Game Geek, and going through the list of games released in 2019, I first of all took everything that I'd really enjoyed from that year, which was about 35 of them. 5 of those were definitely in my top 10, and then it took me a long time to actually go through the rest. I managed to whittle it down, but what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start with some honourable mentions, which didn't quite make my top 10, but nearly did. Maybe next year I should do a top 20, because that would actually be a lot easier. So yeah, I'm going to do honourable mentions first, then I'm going to actually do my top 10. Now, before we start, I have to say that some of the games that I'm going to talk about here I was professionally involved in one way or another. Either one of them I was certainly involved in the development of the game, and some of the other ones I was actually commissioned to work on either the rulebook or the how to play video. However, putting the professional hat aside, this is my personal opinion on the games as a gamer, not affected by my professional involvement in the game. So first of all, my honourable mentions, and these are in alphabetical order. First up is Aeon's End Legacy. Now, I very much enjoy Aeon's End as a game. I love deck building as a mechanism. So many deck builders out there, though, are the play all and then shuffle your discard pile, which for me, although I like some of those games, it does make it very random whether you get the combo or not in your hand at the right time. Now, Aeon's End is a deck builder, but it has some really good rules that make it, for me, much better than a lot of other deck builders. First of all, you don't have to play all of your cards in your hand, and any cards that you don't play, you can keep or you can discard. So you do have more control over the cards in your hand. And also, it has the very clever mechanism of when your deck runs out, you don't shuffle your discard pile. What you do is you flip your discard pile over. So therefore, you do have some control of the order of the cards in the way that they're going to come out. So if you've got 2 cards that combo well together, that's on you to put those cards in your discard pile in that order so that they will come out together. So yeah, Aeon's End Legacy, a deck building game, but a deck building game with a purpose. You are actually trying to do something. I love the setting of the game. It's really good, and as I say, it fixes a number of other deck building problems for me. Now, I like the base game of Aeon's End. I think the game is great, but Aeon's End Legacy took it to a whole new other level. Because Aeon's End Legacy, what it does is it actually strips back all of the things from Aeon's End that you have in the game. So your final Breach Mage at the end of Aeon's End Legacy is a character that you can then take to a normal game. So in normal Aeon's End, you have a Breach Mage who's got all of these special abilities and cool stuff. In Aeon's End Legacy, you start with nothing. And over the course of 8 chapters, you will actually be unlocking that and you will be building up your character. Aeon's End Legacy, unlike some other Legacy games, is actually the best way to start playing Aeon's End because it teaches you the very basics and it progresses upwards. Played the whole campaign, it was really enjoyable to play, I liked the story, I liked the way that the cards evolved with the stickers and everything else, and yeah, it was really good. Would I want to play it again, bearing in mind it's a Legacy game? I probably would, because the choices that you make in the game You can choose different things. So every time you complete a chapter, you get a new selection of cards to add into the offer, and you get 4, and you have to add 2 of them in, I think, or 1 to 3. So you can play it differently. Each time you play, you can play it differently. The story will obviously be the same, and the chapters are linear, but that's not a problem. So yeah, Aeon's End Legacy possibly should have been in my top 10, but definitely in my honourable mentions. Next up is Alubari, A Nice Cup of Tea. Now, I've only played this game a few times, but I really enjoy it. It actually started out as a variant of Snowdonia, which is a very well-respected game, but then it actually got developed and published into its own game. And whilst I like Snowdonia, the tweaks that Alubari makes to the core game, in my opinion, makes it a better game. It's a nice combination of worker placement, some resource management, with an interesting way that the end of game scoring cards work, and it has weather, which affects how much track you can build and things like that. And I like games that use weather. It all fits together nicely into a solid game. Now, unfortunately, due to a few miscommunications, I don't actually have a copy of the game yet. When I eventually get one, I do look forward to playing it again, and I helped with the rulebook for this game. Next up is Amul. Now, many of you will probably not have heard of this game because it did kind of fly under the radar. It's a game originally published by Louter Pellet, which is one of my clients, which is how I got hold of a copy, and published in the US by Stronghold Games. I've played the game a few times and it's just really good. I think one reason I've included it in this list is because I think it's one of those underrated gems that hardly anybody else seems to have talked about. It's a 3 to 8 player card game that on the surface seems very simple, but has a lot of cleverness in it. In each of the 9 rounds, you will draw a card from your deck. You start with 5 cards, so that gets you for 6. Then you'll all simultaneously put a card into the market. Then those cards get revealed, and then in turn order, you will all take a card from the market. So you back up to 6 cards, and then simultaneously, you will all choose a card from your hand to play for that round. So people have compared it a bit to Seven Wonders because it does take a high player count. It isn't really drafting of cards. You do not pass the rest of your cards on, but each round, as I say, you put one into the market, and then in turn order, you take one out of the market, and then you play one from your hand. So it could be that you actually, put a card into the market, you end up taking that card back out of the market, and then you end up playing that card. But that's not the way it normally works. So the rules are fairly simple, but it's the way that it plays, the interaction between the players, because you need to look at it's kind of a bit of set collection with some interesting twists. But you've got to be looking at what the other players are collecting, and you think, oh, well, Colin's collecting gold. Maybe if I put a gold down, he's probably going to take it. Maybe I don't want to put a gold down. And what's also interesting is some of the cards work at the end of the game if they are in your hand, and some of them work if they are on the table. So there are some cards that you need to actually keep in your hand for the end of the game. Anyway, Amul, I've done a playthrough video on it on the channel if you're interested in it. And yeah, under the radar game, but I really enjoyed it. And it's nice to see a game that does take a high player count. A number of people have said it works best at 6, 7 or 8 players, which at the moment is absolutely impossible to play. But I've played it at like 3, 4 and 5 players and I found that quite good as well. Next on my list is Barrage, and I was in 2 minds whether to put this on the list at all. There was a lot to like about the game and the setting, which I think is really cool, reinforced by the artwork that I really liked, even though it's very dark. The core mechanisms of the game, which is mainly worker placement, which I like, but the resource wheel is good too. I've played it about 5 times. Unfortunately, me and my local playgroup ended up coming to the conclusion about the game balance and the strategy of really not producing anything for the first 2 or 3 rounds of the game and just building up, and then producing loads. So I kind of left those plays as thinking, oh, okay, really nice game, lots of good stuff going on, but there seems to be a bit of a, this is the best way to play the game. And that particular strategy seemed to win every game. Now, since then, things have moved on. I've not played it since, but I've spoken to a number of other people who have played it since, and I spoke to them about this issue and they went, Paul, it's not an issue at all. That is one of the strategies, but there are other strategies as well. So it's just the way that our group think evolved with our group, and maybe we're missing something about it. So putting that aside, this is a game that I need to go back to because I very much enjoyed the games that I played of it. Now, there were also some component issues with the game, which was a real shame. I know the Kickstarter campaign didn't go too well. The water drops were just diabolical. The rulebook had a couple of issues with it. That lost it some points for me, and I know there were issues with the resource wheels as well. Otherwise, it may have been a top 10 game. Next up is Crystal Palace, and I've been agonising with this one because at the end of 2019, I was really sure that Crystal Palace was actually going to be in my top 10 games of the year. So yeah, I'm in two minds about it only being in the honourable mentions. I kind of feel a bit guilty about it because it is really good. But to help me decide whether to put it in the top 10, I tried to look at the negatives. And Crystal Palace, there's a lot going on mechanically, and I love the actual dice placement mechanism where you basically set your dice in secret at the start of every round. And then you reveal them, and that's the sum of the pips on the die is how much you pay. And then you place the dice in turn order, one at a time, onto spaces on the board. The higher the dice, the better, and certain spaces require dice of higher values, but money is a very, very tight resource. So yeah, that bit of the game is really good. The theme of the game is quite nice, or the setting of the game is quite nice, kind of inventors, Victorian era, etc., etc. And the production of the game was good, and the rulebook was okay, and everything else. And I did enjoy the game, and I'm a Euro gamer that doesn't really need much theme in the game, but this game did have a lot of tracks with a random name pasted on. Now, I know some people would disagree with me and think the game is very thematic, but just because it's got the name of inventors, some real, some not real, and, you know, invented objects, that doesn't mean it's got theme. At the end of the day, you invent the whatever it is, and it's got a whole bunch of icons on it that bear no relation at all to that device, okay? It's just, do this, get so many points, and here's a bunch of bonuses. They do not fit thematically into, you know, the name of that object. There was a lot going on in this game, and there was a lot of, if you get this bonus, you move your marker up track X. It doesn't matter what track X is called. When you reach space 15 on track X, you get bonus Y, which allows you to move this marker up on this track. Again, doesn't matter what this track is called. It doesn't, none of that fits together thematically. Mechanically it does, but yeah, it's a game I liked playing, and as I say, if it was really difficult, and I do still feel guilty that this isn't in my top 10, but I've had to make some very tough decisions. So this is Crystal Palace. Yeah, really good game, just didn't quite make my top 10. Next entry on my honourable mentions list is a bit of an odd one. It is the Exit and Unlock games. Non-specific, but every year a number of new Exit games come out, as well as another Unlock box or two. So yeah, this isn't about one specific game, because these games are great, and I play them all, and me and Vicky really love playing these escape room style puzzle games. None of them individually would probably ever make my top 10, but that's not because I didn't enjoy them, it's just they sit outside my normal sort of lists. But yeah, every year they come out, we get them, we play them, we love them. Next up is Key Market. This is a very solid Euro game. Now, over the years, Richard Breeze has become a friend of mine, and I do some commissioned videos for him. Richard is most famous for his key games, most notably Keyflower, but there's many others as well. And Key Market is actually not designed by Richard. It's designed by David Brain. Richard did some development work on the game. So it is a little unfortunate, considering I'm friends with Richard, that my favourite key game is actually Key Market. I just really like the core mechanisms in Key Market, the pace of the game, how it flows, moving around the board, growing vegetables and stuff like that. Now, 2019 was actually the second edition of Key Market. The original game came out many years before, but there were some small changes to the rules, which made the game better, in my opinion. Next up is My Abbey. Now, this didn't make my top 10, simply because I haven't played it enough. What I have played of it, though, was very good, and if given more hours in the day, I would have played it a whole bunch more, and it may have even made my top 10. It's a very clever game. It's designed by Michael Kiesling, who has done loads of great games in the past. It's published by Haber. The game has relatively simple rules, but great gameplay. You're basically taking tiles from a display and adding them to your board, but the rules about what you can place and where you can place it lead to some really interesting gameplay choices. You're restricted on the columns and the rows that you can place it on, and then you'll score points based on the actual things that you've placed and the vertical height of them. Also included in the game is a whole bunch of extra mini expansions all thrown in, which add lots of variability to the game, which is also really cool. My Abbey, sort of gateway game, maybe gateway plus game, but yeah, one I've really enjoyed playing. People I've spoken to have really enjoyed it, and as I say, if I'd have had time to play it 10 or 15 times more, it may have even made my top 10. Next honourable mention goes to another old game that's been redone. This is On the Underground. Ludi Creations published the new edition of the game in 2019. The original edition was 2006. Now, full disclosure here again, Ludi Creations are one of my clients, and I worked on the rulebook for this game, but that's my only involvement. Now, I'd never played the original. I'd heard a lot of very good things about it, and it's been out of print for many, many years, with a number of very, very prominent big fans of the game. From working on the rulebook, I actually got to play the game a few times, and it's just really good. And this is the thing, when I'm working on a game professionally, I'll play the game once or twice, but if I don't particularly enjoy the game, I'll just work on the rules and then I'm done with it. However, On the Underground was one which was really popular with me and my regular gamers, and it got played a lot. I lost track of how many times I played it, probably 10, 15 times. And that's because it was just good. It's a gateway game. I've played this game with people who are brand new to gaming, but I've also played it with very experienced gamers, and it works well for them as well. Now, people who are new to gaming will pick up the rules and be able to play the game, and thematically it's about building the London Underground, although the new version has the Berlin map on the other side, so you're building like the U-Bahn, I believe, as well. But the rules of the game are relatively simple, so new players can pick it up and go, oh, what am I doing? I'm building track, right. But hardcore gamers will be looking at the board and be trying to analyze the routes and work out. And they will generally always do better because there is actually quite a bit of skill to the game. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to build the right routes for a passenger that moves around the board according to specific rules to try and get the passenger to use your lines and not other people's, because that's what gets you the points. So yeah, that's on the Underground. The new version is called London, I believe, stroke Berlin, because yeah, it's 2 games in 1, or two alternative maps anyway. Next up is Tiny Towns, and this is not a game that I would even think would be anywhere near my top 10, except, when I think about it, and I think how many times I've played this game, and with how many different groups I've played this game at all player counts, I felt it deserved to be. Certainly in my honourable mentions, possibly even in my top 10. It's playable at 1 to 6 players, and it's good at all player counts. It is a gateway game, another one I have used with people who are brand new to gaming. It's got a lot of variability, and it takes about half an hour to play. The core mechanism involves taking cubes, putting them on your board, and trying to build patterns of the cards that were chosen for that particular game. Those cards are chosen at random, which is where the variability comes in. And those buildings that you build will score you points. The player interaction in the game is the way that the resources are chosen. One player will name a resource when it's their turn, and everyone must then take that cube and must place it on their player board, whether they want to or not. So when you first play the game, you can just think about yourself. I need a glass, so I'm going to say glass and forget what impact it has on other players. But when you start playing the game at a more gamery level, you'll be like, Brian looks like he's building a tavern, and he's probably going to pick glass next. So I don't need to. I'll pick stone because nobody else seems to need stone, but I do. I've played the game loads. I've taught it to loads of people, as I say, including new gamers. There are expansions for it. I don't have any of the expansions, but that's just the base game of Tiny Towns. Watergate is the last game in my honourable mentions, and I really agonised about putting this game into my top 10. And it was actually there until yesterday evening when I finished writing this script. And I looked at some of the games that were in my honourable mentions, and I felt they deserved to be in there a little bit ahead of Watergate. But if I was doing a top 11 games, Watergate would be in there, or possibly Crystal Palace. I don't know. This has been really hard list to put together. Anyway, Watergate, as its name suggests, is set at the time of the Watergate scandal, which is something that I personally find absolutely fascinating about how that could have happened, and all of the political motives and personal motives of all of the people involved. In fact, the back of the rulebook is really good because there are historical explanations of all of the characters and what went on, and that's a really nice touch that you do not see in normal games, even in historical games. Watergate is primarily an asymmetric card-driven game where the journalist player is trying to find evidence and make connections on the board to informants, and the Nixon player is trying to hide the evidence and remove the contacts and not resign before the end of the game. It plays well, it doesn't take too long, and it's a game that I would generally never say no to playing when the opportunity arises. It's published by Frosted Games and Capstone Games and designed by Matthias Kramer. And now, just before we get into my top 10, I'm going to talk about some games which some people are going to be surprised aren't on my list. And that is because I haven't played them. Pax Pamir, Clank Legacy and the Taverns of Tiefenthal. I'm pretty sure all of these games would have made my either top 10 or my honourable mention, because everybody I know that likes the same kind of games that I do have played these games and rated them. So if you are surprised why those games haven't made my list, it is simply because I haven't played them, and therefore, yeah, I can't really rate them if I haven't played them. And now my actual top 10. Now, unlike last year, where I did my top 10 games in no particular order, I do actually have a number 1 game this year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list the first 9 games in alphabetical order, and then I'm going to leave my number 1 game to the end. First up is Caylus 1303, designed by William Attier. The original edition was published in 2005 by Istari Games. The second edition is published by Space Cowboys, although it's kind of the same people because Istari Games and Space Cowboys merged. In fact, the main 3 people who worked on the original Caylus also worked on the new version. How can this game not be in my top 10? Caylus, the original game, was my number 1 favourite game for a long time. And I was really nervous, like many people, about a new version coming out. But ultimately, things have moved on. The original is an excellent game. And some people, I know, will still regard that as the better game. But the new version still has, for me, all of the tension that the old one has and plays in like 2/3 of the time. I've played the new version a bunch and it is excellent. Caylus is one of those games which put worker placement on the map. It's not the very first worker placement game, but it is probably the one that made worker placement, great. It also, for a Eurogamer who doesn't like direct player interaction, it has one of the best player interaction mechanisms that I've seen in a Euro game, if not the best. And that is the way that the Provost moves around. The way that you can manipulate the movement of the Provost so that you have influence over which buildings will get activated in that round, or more importantly, the threat of moving the Provost, leads the player interaction in the game to be just excellent. And as I say, I don't like direct player interaction in a game. Take that games, or I'm going to attack you, or whatever, unless it's a 2-player game. Whereas in Caylus, it's just done brilliantly. And yeah, I'm really happy they did a new version, because whilst I love the original game, and a lot of people love the original game, it just doesn't get played. As I say, things have moved on. Average playtime has come down over games. Average complexity has come down on average overall. There are still obviously some longer, heavier games out there, but the new version, Caylus 1303, has reignited my love for the game and has opened the game to a wider audience. And that is the version that I will now play. I won't ever see myself playing the original game. Whilst I do like it and I do respect it, I think the new version offers almost identical experience, as I say, in less time. Next up is Cooper Island, a 1 to 4 player game designed by Andreas Odenhal and published by Frosted Games and Capstone Games. From my very first play of this game, I knew it was going to be one of my favourite games of the year, and the more I played it, the more I enjoyed it. The most surprising thing to me about this game is the depth of the game and the time it takes to play. This isn't a long game for a game of its depth and complexity. It's heavy, and there are definitely some parts of the game which, some people might class as a bit fiddly, with a lot going on. You only need to look at the player board to see how much stuff there is going on. And whilst the main actions are relatively simple, it's all of the extra stuff that you can do on your turn that makes it a very thinky game. But it plays in like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Speaking of the player board, the graphic design in this game and the iconography, whilst it might look scary, is absolutely superb and is extremely clear. And in a game like this, that kind of thing is absolutely essential. I've seen many other games of this weight and complexity fail at the graphic design and the iconography because things just aren't clear. I love the puzzly aspect of this game. The way that you build up your own peninsula, the 3D nature of placing the tiles. You actually have very few total actions in this game, and there is a lot to accomplish. So it's very much about being efficient with your actions and making the most of what you have. Cooper Island is good, in my opinion, at all player counts, although it will take longer with more players. Next up is Letter Jam, a 2 to 6 player cooperative word game from Czech Games Edition, designed by Ondra Skupy. And full disclosure here, I was on the development team for this game, but that isn't why it's on the list. All credit to the designer and the rest of the development team. I played an earlier version of this game about 18 months before it came out, and I was doing private demos of the game at UK conventions. It was great fun, but there were some issues with the game, and it went back to the drawing board for a redesign. Kept the same basic principle, and then a year later I got a chance to play the new version of the game, which still needed polishing, which is what the development team job is, and it needed tweaking. Yeah, that's the part I was involved in. Now, I'm very happy with the end result of this game. Letter Jam is a sort of party game, but it takes about 45 minutes to play and it can be quite thinky. So I can see why some people say it doesn't count as a party game. And I'm not a fan of word games, nor am I actually very good at spelling, but this game is just so clever in the way that it works. I've actually demoed this game now close to 200 times and I've loved every one of them. Well, almost every one of them anyway. What you basically do in this game is that each player will have a word made up of cards. They don't know what the word is and the cards will be jumbled. And gradually over the course of the game, they are trying to work out what all of their letters are. And then at the end of the game, they'll try to, anagram them into an actual word. But the way that each round works is that everybody will have one of their letters in a stand facing away from them, and everybody will see all of the other letters. And basically anybody can take a turn next, and everybody is trying to spell a word based on the letters that they can see. Now there's extra rules, there's wild cards, and there's other clever rules as well. But that is essentially what it is. And then in order to try and work out what letter you've got, you are hoping that somebody else gives you a clue and says, right, okay, so I'm going to spell a word out, and you use these numbered tokens to spell the word out, and then people will pick a word, spell it out, and you can see all of the other letters, and they've picked you as letters 3 and 4, and you're thinking, right, so you write it down on your piece of paper. And basically, yeah, it uses this really clever cooperative mechanism with very limited communication between the players, i.e. none really, apart from the way that people suggest the words that they can spell. So you're not allowed to obviously talk about words or anything else, but the cleverness in the way that people say, I've got a 5-letter word that uses 3 players, and everybody's going, oh, a 5-letter word that uses 3 players. That means somebody's letter is going to get used more than once. That's really good. And then somebody else might say, oh, well, I've got a 7-letter word that uses 5 players, and you think, oh, 7-letter word that uses 5 players. And there's other factors as well. But basically, yeah, it's just really clever. I really like it. I kind of class it as a party game because for me, spending 45 minutes playing a thinky game, which is just a lot of fun, that for me classes as a party game. Next up is Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth, a 1 to 5 player cooperative game from designers Nathan Hajek and Grace Hoddinghouse. Now, this is a funny one, and some people will think that I've lost my mind because this game is very similar to Mansions of Madness 2nd edition, that I have used in the past very strongly negative words to describe and rate as a 3 on Board Game Geek. And not only do I enjoy Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth, but it's made my top 10. So why? Well, I'll admit there are some reasons why I didn't like Mansions of Madness, which are still present in this game, but not everything. And there are some very key differences. Both games are app-driven, which I don't have a problem with in games, and the app for this game is absolutely fantastic. They've done a brilliant job with the app in this game. The card mechanism for skill tests in the game is good. It's certainly better than Mansions of Madness. And in Lord of the Rings game, you have different characters with different skills, and you have roles, and you have cards and everything else. Again, that is a lot more than you have in Mansions of Madness. Now, the minis are also great, and the atmosphere of Lord of the Rings, I feel they captured really well. The scenarios are good, and I personally feel they're quite replayable, despite the story being the same. I am a bit of a Lord of the Rings fan, which does influence my choice a bit. Now, I have to say, I've not actually finished the main campaign yet, but at the time of filming this video, I have literally yesterday just started a series of live playthroughs. So hopefully by the end of this month, I will have finished the first campaign. And for about £5, there is another campaign that you can download, DLC, which doesn't require any more physical components, and allows you to play the game again. But as I say, for me, I felt for the scenarios I've played were replayable. Now, the game isn't perfect, of course. Like, when you interact with a search token, very often it's a bit of flavor text, a random test, and then if you succeed, you get an inspiration token. And I get that over many, many plays can get a bit repetitive after a while. And whilst the test might feel a bit random at first, you kind of do get to know the flavor text behind the tokens. So you'll get to know if something is going to be like an agility test or a wit test in advance. Now, knowing in advance what type of test it is, some people might not like that. The next time I play the game, for example, and I come across, a female hobbit sat on a fence wanting to talk to me, I know that's going to be a wit test. And some people might think, oh, well, that's kind of spoilt the game. And other people might be like, yeah, we've learned from previous games. We know that that's a wit test. So let's send the character that's got a good wit. It depends on you. Now, when it comes to combat, your attacks are done using the same card system as skill checks, but what the enemy does is generated randomly by the app. But that's okay. I think the reason I didn't like it in Mansions of Madness is that the whole combat was just generated randomly. It basically said, do you want to use your knife or your club? No, the knife would be better against these creatures, so you say knife, and then it tells you what happens. In this game, at least you've got some control. Anyway, games on my list. First live playthrough is on the channel now. It did it yesterday. It reminded me how much I enjoyed the game. I'll tell you at the end of January or whenever I finish the campaign how I feel about it then. Next is Maracaibo, a 1 to 4 player game designed by Alexander Pfister and published by Games Up and Capstone Games. It will come as no surprise to anybody who knows the games that I like that this is in my top 10. In fact, I received a message this morning from somebody saying that if this wasn't in my top 10, there would be trouble. I like Alexander's heavier games. Mombasa was my favourite game of the year 2015. Great Western Trail was my joint favourite game of 2016. Maracaibo builds a lot on the designer's previous games, including various parts taken from other games, but it's been put together in its own package. It's a medium to heavy game, maybe heavy, with a lot going on and different routes to victory. One of the really interesting parts is that on your turn, you can move up to 7 spaces, and the round ends for everybody when someone gets to the end. So you need to be prepared for one player rushing to the end of the round, and you have to adapt your strategy accordingly. The way that all of the mechanisms in this game combine together is just perfect for me. Rulebooks for complex games are hard to write, and the one for Maracaibo wasn't as good as the ones for Mombasa or Great Western Trail. And in fact, the original printing did unfortunately miss a key rule that made the game pretty much unplayable, but it was so obvious most people went, do you refresh the offer at the end of each turn? And it was like, yeah. These things happen. The game itself is great, but that's not all. The game has a full campaign mode with a story and an evolving board. Now, I've only played the first scenario of the campaign at the time of recording this video, but starting this week, I am doing a whole series of playthroughs, solo playthroughs of the campaign, and I hope to get that completed by the end of the month. So yes, by the end of January, maybe a bit later, I will have played the entire campaign, which I've been wanting to do for quite a while. So yeah, this comment here is based on me playing the base game a number of times and chapter 1 of the campaign, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to like it. Next up is Marvel Champions, a 1 to 4 player cooperative living card game from Fantasy Flight Games, designed by Michael Boggs, Nate French and Caleb Grace. Now, I was at Gen Con 2019 when this game got announced, and I immediately got massively excited about it. And when the game came out, it was proof that I was right to be, because sometimes I get excited about something and then get let down. But this game, I mean, Fantasy Flight have published many LCGs over the years, and they've all evolved and got gradually better, improving on the core mechanisms. Games where you just draw 1 or 2 cards a turn are a thing of the past. And the way that this game handles the card draw and the deck construction is just brilliant. The mulligan rule at the start is also really clever, the way that you can choose to mulligan some of your cards, but they go into your discard pile, not back into your deck. I love the different scenarios. I love how the different characters work. Everything is so thematic. What looks to be like a few numbers on a card and some keywords and a bit of text, it all fits. If you can picture that character and what they're doing, it all works. Now, I know the game can get a little bit mathy. You get to the position where you're like, okay, so we need to do 7 more damage to Green Goblin to push him to stage 2. So if I play this card for 4 and then you attack with Black Widow for 3, it can get a bit mathy, but I don't mind that. A lot of games, devolve down to maths. The best thing about Marvel Champions for me is playing it is just so enjoyable. Whilst there's little flavour text or narrative on the cards, as opposed to something like Arkham Horror card game, for example, I can picture everything happening in the game as if it was a scene from the movie. It really feels like you're watching a Marvel movie, and the tweaks to the rules from the other LCGs, that when you attack, you can attack anyone anywhere and not just the enemy that's engaged with you. And when somebody somewhere gets attacked, anyone, anywhere, including your allies, can jump in to defend them. It just makes the number of options that you have in combat encounters a lot, but also, as I say, really feels like the scene of a movie. I don't play this game anywhere near enough, and that makes me very sad. Next up is another game from Fantasy Flight Games, and this is Star Wars Outer Rim. Until this morning, this game was actually in my honourable mentions and not in my actual top 10. But when I was writing the script for this last night, I was writing about this and saying how much I love this game. So I decided this morning I've juggled things around a bit and it is now in my top 10. I'm aware that I like this game a lot more than other reviewers, and I have less of an issue with some of the aspects of the game that many people have complained about. For a start, it's Star Wars, which is cool. But it's my favourite part of the Star Wars universe, okay? The Outer Rim and everything's all nitty and gritty. But it's not just that. There's a lot of good, very good game mechanisms in there. Yes, there's a bunch of dice rolling. Yes, there's some randomness of when you look for the characters, whether you find the one that you're looking for. But there's a lot of things in the game to address that, like the jobs, for example. You know when you get the job which skills are going to be important and which ones are essential, so you don't go in blind. There's a lot of very cool mechanisms in there that take it away from the American-style game market, which I know it is, but there's a few things in there that drag me back. And if it weren't for those few things in there, although the setting of the game is cool, I probably wouldn't play it. So it's those things that I really like that keeps me coming back to it. And yeah, the game is just so cool to play if you're a Star Wars fan. Maybe if you're not a Star Wars fan. And I find it very thematic. All of the characters, all of the ships, all of the items, everything that they do in the game, similar to Marvel Champions, is like, oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see the effect that has on the game, and you can just picture it. It's also, the game's a little bit sandboxy. Do you go bounty hunting? Do you complete jobs? Do you do smuggling? All sorts of things. There's so many options in the game that you can do. The only real issue I have with the game is that it's just a bit too long. I know my first few games of it were actually ended early without us finishing the game due to time. Now, we were learning the game at the time. There is a short variant, but the short variant just left me wanting more. 1 to 2 players might be the best way to play this game. And whilst I've accepted the randomness of the game because the other factors outweigh them, the playtime can be a bit of an issue. So yeah, 1 to 2 players, maybe 3, but probably not 4 players. Next up is Tainted Grail, a 1 to 4 player cooperative game from Awaken Realms. Now, full disclosure here, I did the official how to play video for this game, but I was not involved in any other way. I wasn't involved in the development of the game or anything like that. And let's get this out there at the start. This game is far from perfect. I'm not going to go into detail too much about the issues with the game because they've been well documented elsewhere by a lot of other reviewers regarding the clarity of the rules, the difficulty of the game, the amount of grind, the amount of downtime with 3 to 4 players, the fact that you have super nice minis which you put on the board for 2 minutes and then you take off again. And I'll be honest with you, me and Vicky started playing this game and at the end of chapter 2 we almost quit because of those issues with the game. So with all of those issues, how the heck has this game ended up in my top 10? And I will admit, there are games outside of my top 10 which don't have these issues. But this is my video, it's my top 10 games, and ultimately it's the one that I've enjoyed playing the most. And the reason I'm biased by this game is it's me and Vicky played this game, and I think a total of 17 or 18 times, and we've played all the way to the end. Because after chapter 2, what we did is we switched to story mode. Story mode is an official variant included in the rulebook. But also, we changed our play style because Tainted Grail requires you to play a different way. In so many other fantasy cooperative games, you get into a fight and at the end of the fight, you heal back up to full. Okay? That's just how these games work. Tainted Grail has a very realistic setting. Not that I know what fighting fantasy monsters is like, but in Tainted Grail, you get wounded and your characters have like 6, 7 or 8 health. You get wounded, those wounds will heal 1 per day and only if you eat food. And as I say, I'm so used to playing other fantasy games where you run in, you do loads of damage, and then at the end of the adventure, you heal to full and you carry on. And in Tainted Grail, when we started playing it, we got into a fight and we were half killed by this fight. I mean, our characters were just starting out, we didn't really have any equipment, and we were half dead. And then we'd get into another fight. And we were like, well, this is crazy. What we didn't fully appreciate is that you are, at the start, supposed to run away from fights, okay? We didn't realise that. We knew the rules, but we just didn't do it. We went, oh, fight, let's have a fight. Oh, wait a minute, we're half dead. Oh, wait a minute, we're about to have another fight, but I'm already screwed because we're half dead. And then we found ourselves on 1 health with no food, and we're like, oh, what's going on here? And as I say, all we're doing is struggling to survive. When you play Tainted Grail, if you haven't played it and you're watching this video, be aware at the start of the game when you are not very, your characters aren't very good, look at the fight and go, what are we going to get out of this fight? 1 wealth. Do we really need the 1 wealth? No. Right, let's just avoid it. And what you do at the start is you actually avoid these fights. Go into the fights that you need to, if the reward is going to be useful for you. And it just suddenly, after playing on story mode and realizing that the fights are optional, then all of a sudden we were able to play the game for the good part of the game. The downside was, after about chapter 8, the game became a little bit too easy. We were defeating the biggest monsters in like 1 to 2 rounds without breaking a sweat. So yeah, we perhaps should have gone away from story mode near the end. Now, the setting of Tainted Grail is a mixture of Arthurian legends combined with a weird fantasy-like stuff. I can't really explain too much more without spoilers, but suffice it to say that the setting for Tainted Grail is one of the most immersive ones that I have ever played of any game ever. I was completely gripped by the flavour of the world, and I personally felt that the narrative writing was very good, and it again really helped cement the immersion. The whole campaign took us about 40 to 50 hours of gameplay, but it is less linear than other campaign games. There are different routes you can take in the campaign, and speaking to other people who've played it and completed it, they ended up doing very different things, which is also really cool. The fact that the storyline can actually go off in a whole bunch of different directions. And what I'm talking about here is just the first campaign of Tainted Grail, which is the Fall of Avalon. The other two are on the way to me later this month. I'll have to find some time to play them this year. Next up, The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9. And I really agonised about whether to put this in my actual top 10 or not, or just in my honourable mentions. In fact, until last night, this is one that was just in my honourable mentions and ended up getting moved in, moved it back again. I'm still not sure. I really should have done a top 20. That would have been better. Anyway, I was very late to the party with The Crew. I saw almost every other reviewer I know playing it and raving about it and being amazed by it at the end of 2019, at the start of 2020, but I never had the opportunity to play it. Cosmos UK sent me a review copy of the game, which arrived just as COVID-19 started to spread and lockdown happened. So the game sat there for months calling at me to be played. Eventually the lockdown rules eased and 2 friends were allowed to come over and we played it. Now, whilst I may not be very good at the game, because it requires a certain level of mental gymnastics that I'm just not good at, it is amazing. And ultimately, it's a trick-taking game with a twist. The twist being that it's cooperative, and depending on the mission, you need to work together to ensure that certain players win tricks with certain cards, and you can't talk to each other. But there are ways that you can give limited information in the game. Games like this always impress me because of the amount of depth in them based on simple rules. And here's me playing heavy Euros with 40-page rulebooks that take an hour to teach, and then games like The Crew are a 5-minute teach and just, really good to play. The base game comes with 50 missions. You're supposed to play them in order. They do get progressively harder. I've only done missions 1 to 5, and I've done that 3 times with different groups. I do need to go back and play it more. And because I hadn't played it that much, that's why I wasn't sure whether to put this in. I have heard also the game doesn't scale completely brilliantly. It's a bit too easy with 3 and a bit too hard at 5, with 4 being the optimum number. But this game won the prestigious Deutsche Spieler Prize 2020, and yeah, well deserved. Great game, and also a good gateway game, because a lot of old school gamers, not gamers, but players of card games, are used to trick taking anyway. And what this does is, if you've got people who don't play any modern board games but no trick taking games, you can say, well, I'll tell you what, let's play The Crew, because it shows people who haven't had any experience of modern gaming what it can be like, because it takes something familiar to them and changes it. A little bit like Dragon Castle did with Mahjong and things like that, taking old games and tweaking them and turn them into more modern games. So yeah, that's The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9. And now, my number 1 game of 2019. And it's one reason why I like to keep these lists a year after everyone else, is to ensure that I don't just get caught up in the excitement of the moment, and I actually give time to reflect. And many of the games that I've talked about in this video so far would have been different. If I'd have filmed this a year ago, like The Crew wouldn't have been in the list because I never played it. However, with this game that I'm about to talk about, I already called this. At the end of 2019, I called this my number 1 game of the year, and that hasn't changed. The game is Cloudspire, a 1 to 4 player, cooperative or competitive or solo game designed by the team at Chip Theory Games and published by them as well. And I'm really trying to put to one side my personal feelings about chip theory games, because as a publisher, I love what they do and I love how they go about it. This is just going to be about the game itself. And if you were to tell me at the start of 2019 that a tactical combat tower defense game would be my #1 game of the year, I would suggest that you sought professional help. But that is where it is. According to BGG, I've played this game 15 times, which is about right, and I've just scratched the surface. I've played the solo game about 5 times, although the first 3 of those games were stopped halfway through as I was getting a whole bunch of rule wrong and I was just learning how to play. I've played a lot of 1 versus 1, which I think is probably the best mode of play. I've also tried the 1 versus 1 versus 1, which is the only game mode that I don't think worked at all. So normal 3-player game issue. And I've played a 2 versus 2 team mode. I haven't actually played any of the cooperative scenarios yet. Now, because it's chip theory games, the component quality is great and the game is priced accordingly. Chip theory games do premium products. Part of me feels that I'd be lying if I said that the quality didn't contribute to the game being on the list, but if I'm true to myself, I don't think it contributed that much. Of course, it's really nice, but I'm trying to evaluate the game itself. And even if this had like cardboard chits instead of the nice poker chips, I'd still rate the game, as long as they were nice chits. If Cloudspire was just a competitive game where 2 to 4 players fight each other, it probably wouldn't be my #1. Despite me loving it and appreciating it, it's because it has all of the other modes of play included. And these aren't just, here's 1 extra page of rules for you to play solo. There is a whole extra book full of solo scenarios and cooperative scenarios. All of them are cleverly thought out, requiring you to adopt different strategies and tactics each game, with enough variability to mean that you can't just always play exactly the same scenario exactly the same way each time. Cloudspire is unlike any other game that I have in my collection. And it took me a few trial games to overcome the learning curve. The rulebook is okay. It's not as bad as some people say, but the structure of it makes it a bit hard to learn. But knowing the rules of Cloudspire and then knowing how to play is another thing entirely, because of the way that each of the factions work. Each faction has a sheet listing all of their fortress upgrades on one side and how they work, and you need to turn those rules into something that you actually understand and put to use during the game. On top of that, you've got a whole bunch of available units and spires, and whilst it might look like just a few numbers and a keyword or two, you need to learn how those keywords work, and that's something that you need to be prepared for. And it's a reason why a lot of people struggled with the game, because they were constantly having to look up all the time during the game, oh, another keyword, what does that do? And then not be able to realise how to use that to their advantage. And I get that. Like I said, it took me a number of games to get my head around it, and it's because I saw what was good in the game and I persevered and I put in the time and effort to learn it. And again, it's not like games where the rules are so bad you have to play it multiple times to get the rules. In most places I found the rules were clear. It was just working out how to apply those rules to an actual situation on the board, which means you can actually then start playing well. And the factions, as I mentioned, are very asymmetric and they play very differently. And there's a number of different builds for each faction. You're not going to unlock all of the fortress upgrades for a faction in every game. So there are different ways to play them. In one game you could unlock these ones, and then in another game you might decide to unlock different ones. And although I've played it a bunch, 15 times is more than most other games in my collection, I'm no good at it. Watching a game of Cloudspire played with people who actually know how to play the game properly is amazing. There are so many tactical layers and small decisions that have a huge impact on the game. It can be scary. Like simply, what order do you stack your units on your fortress? Now that will determine the order in which they move, and crucial mistakes can be made if you don't properly plan for it, which is tough when you're learning the game. But you need to learn from your mistakes and learn better next time. It is a skill thing. It's not a random thing. It's down to skill. So yeah, 15 games in, and I can see myself having played 100 games of Cloudspire and still enjoying it. And I don't think I can say that about most other games in my collection. I need another 2 months off work. And that's it for another year. I know these videos are generally popular, top 10s, and so many other people do them. I not only want to do them myself, but I also feel that I should. But yeah, boy, they hard to do. The time it's taken to put this one together has been more than I thought. As mentioned at the start, a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters who fund the channel and make videos like this possible. Make sure you click on the little thumb on the video, leave a comment with which ones on this list you agree with, which ones you disagree with. And if you enjoy the content that I make and you want to support the channel moving forward, please consider supporting me on Patreon. This month, January 2021, I have taken the month off from doing commissioned videos. I am doing lots and lots of live streaming all month, and it's all purely supported through the Patreon campaign. So yeah, thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for making what I do possible. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching. Gaming Rules is proudly sponsored by Game Toppers, upgrading your gaming experience. Visit GameToppersLLC.com.